The subject of this interview is Miss Dorothea Burns, and today's date is January 20, 2012. This interview is being conducted at Neighborhood House and is part of the Civic Voices International Democracy Memory Bank Project. Miss Dorothea Burns, would you please affirm that you have signed the deed of gift authorizing the Memory Bank Project to make this interview available to future researchers?
Yes, I have signed the paper.
Thank you. Now we will begin with our first question. Can you walk me through your childhood neighborhood?
Yes, I was born in St. Paul in the Summit University community. I have lived there all of my life. First home that I can remember from pictures was at 406 Farrington, which was on the other side of the university. And when I began grade school, the family moved to 689 Eaglehart Avenue, which was on the south side of the university.
So during your childhood, what is one memory that you remember most about your neighborhood?
I remember most about my neighborhood were the families and friends that we had there. They were all very supportive. My mother was very sickly, and so therefore the neighbors sort of looked after us while my father worked, and we had good contact with not only them, those that lived next door, but around us. I had a few relatives that lived in that community also, and attended church in the community. One of the great things was that we had a community center called Hallie Community Center, and I got my first visit there when my mother was well, was at the Well Baby Clinic, and family members used to tell us all about Hallie as we were growing up, and then I became an active member after, I would say, when it was time for nursery school.
So I heard that your old neighborhood used to be the old Rhondo, right?
Correct. It was a Rhondo district. Rhondo was about 4 blocks north of where we lived.
Can you tell me how the construction of I-94 highway affected you personally about the Rhondo?
I was much older then. Actually, I was married and had, I think, 3 of my children at that time when the I-94 came through. I remember there was a lot of controversy about it because it divided the neighborhood, and there were some questions of how people would have access to the other side, and there were some heated discussions, and 2 of the people that I knew quite well, Father Cardi and Katie McGuat, were very instrumental in making the community aware of that they have rights too, and they need to add their voices to what was taking place at that particular time with the freeway.
When the I-94 was in construction and old Rhondo was being torn apart, how did you feel about the economic freedom?
Actually, I felt a little depressed about it because all the familiar places and things that were important to us, like our doctor, the dentist, the drugstore, the dry cleaner, all those things that are pertinent to having a community that is actively involved in things and having things easily accessible, the grocery store, the meat stores, all those things were taken from us when the freeway came through, because the highway came through that, what you would call the commercial district, and it was very harmful, we felt, to the people. and some of those things never came back.
What did you wish government would have done to help keep the old Rhondo?
I think that there could have been better communication with the community people so that they thoroughly understood what was going to take place. The people in the community should have had a better, a clearer or louder voice in the way, the route of the freeway, and whether it would be a superstructure rather than taking things from the ground level and then going down, which then gave us a feeling of everybody would be whizzing by, but the community would not be seen.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that you guys lost all your grocery shop place areas, your
most of them.
Where did you go after the last
Well, we had to go either 4 or 5 blocks to the other side to Selby, or we had to go on the other side of the freeway towards University. But as I said, some of the things they were not replaced. The barber shops and beauty shops were not at that particular time replaced in that particular area. So it meant that there was a distance to go. And you have to remember during the time that I was growing up, transportation was very important too. And when they took out Rhondo, then the bus line that ran down that particular street that would take us to downtown or to Minneapolis was no longer there. And so we had to go either to University or to Selby to make those connections.
So were you involved in any action of taking power to keep Rhondo the way it was?
It wasn't that we wanted to keep Rhondo the way it was. We wanted a voice into what would happen and how we could have better access to making sure that it was more accessible in terms of the things that we felt we needed. I personally was not against freeways, but it was just the way it was done, and it was almost as though it didn't matter to the powers to be how it got, just as long as it got through.
So I've heard that you've been the assistant director of Hallie Q. Brown Community Center for the last 5 decades. What encouraged you to stay?
Okay, I have to clarify that. I started at Hallie as a child, grew up in the program, became a volunteer, and then I was hired in the office. Then I directed the day camp, and I directed some of the programs, and I was a secretary. I did not become the assistant director until after the board of directors made the decision to move the center or to rebuild on the other side of the freeway. So we went south of the freeway, actually right up the street from where I used to live on Eaglehart and Kent, and the new building was built there, and it was became the Hallie Q. Brown Martin Luther King Center. It was a multi-service center that housed 11 agencies and had a small park attached to it.
So I also heard that you provided an end-time presentation at the Women of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. What inspired you to take part of anti-racism?
I felt that if you don't put your voice to work, then you cannot be heard. And so, as quiet as I was, as I grew up, I decided that I had to speak up. And so I did take training And I listened to the people in the community who were leaders, and I tried to use my voice to make a difference.
So, when did you find the time that you want to take action and voice up for this?
I'm not sure I understood that.
Okay, so it's like, how did you become politically aware of this?
Well, there were information meetings going on in the community about, and in my church, about racism and how it affects people. The church that I belonged to was right next door to where we lived at the time. I became active in the church, the Lutheran church, and confirmed there. All 4 children were confirmed in the Lutheran church. And through the church, I became involved with the Senate. And on the Senate level, I began to participate in anti-racism meetings. I was elected to the church vestry. I believe I was the first African-American vestry leader at this particular church, the Lutheran Church of the Redeemer. And from that, I took some training from others about racism and how it could be combated and how necessary it was for people to speak out. And from that, I began to, after the training, well, I did go to Chicago also for some training, so I was active at the Senate level. And I became a member of a group. I had a partner. She lived in Apple Valley, and we took the training along with other people. And our job after that training was to go back into the community and go to the other churches, Lutheran churches basically, and speak to why racism was something that divided us rather than bringing us together.
So, being divided, how did you feel like from your feelings?
I think that when you feel that you are being ignored because of your race, that it is very harmful and it's very hurtful. And my way of overcoming that was to become more active and involved and bring my story to the people who I felt might understand better what was happening in terms of racism on their part.
Well, have there ever been a time where you experienced any acts of racism towards you?
Yes, there were. In many instances, I have felt that throughout my life. And in the beginning, I did not know that it was racism, the way I was being treated. I really thought it was me. Some people, and it's hard for me to articulate that because I was young and naive, I think, about some things. But there were incidents when it became very revealing to me that the way I was being treated was a form of racism.
Has there ever been a time where a Caucasian will approach based on racism towards you?
I've had instances in stores where I was not waited on. Everybody else was waited on and I was not. And I brought it to the clerk's attention and she ignored me. And I don't know what I did. I think I spoke out. As I said, I'm quiet. I really do not get in confrontation with people. But I just said, I was here first and I need to be served. And that was, again, one of the things that kept me moving, I think, in the right direction, learning more about racism and the harm that it can bring to a person, to a family, to a community, and to the world in general.
Well, how do you think that racism has changed in the world?
I think racism is still here, and sometimes it sort of befuddles me because we think that we have made many strides, and I think we have. And I know everybody will say, well, you have a African-American president, but that has nothing to do with racism in and of itself, how it goes throughout other things in people's lives. And I think that the harm is still there. I think things are much better, but I think things need to get even better than that because to me there is still some innate racism. You can hear it when people talk about an ethnic group in a disparaging way, that it causes more problems than sometimes I think they realize.
Do you think that government is doing enough to support anti-racism?
I think that more could be done, but it takes all the people working together if it's ever going to be eradicated. I don't know if I will see that in my lifetime, but I would hope that one day people could understand that as people, we're all people regardless of our race and our can't say that word, but anyways, our race and the color of our skin, because sometimes it's the color of skin that divides us before people get to really know who you are and what you're all about.
So you mentioned more can be done. What do you mean by more can be done?
I think there could be better understanding. I think in the schools, I think there's more that can be done to make all people understand how important it is to value people for who they are, not how they look or how you think they should look, or why you are doing what you're doing against them because they don't look like you, they might not live near you, and so you really don't know who they are, and you have a way of not understanding or caring about them.
Do you believe there is racism in education?
Yes, in some ways, yes it is. I think it's throughout the whole spectrum of society.
Who do you believe can make a difference in government's effect on racism?
I think we all have a hand in that. We all have to do better in making sure that people become more accepting. Even those who are being pushed aside because of race need to take their voices and work to make sure that there are changes. We can't ignore them. You can't turn your head and say, well, I just won't go there anymore because I was treated in a certain manner. You've got to be forceful sometimes without being belligerent or whatever. You need to use your voice to bring about change, your voice and your actions.
What do you think is best to take action and move forward?
I think people need to begin to meet, and we were doing this years ago, meet together, sit together, talk to one another, and get a better understanding of who you are and where you're coming from, And we need to be open and honest with each other. And I think that that, in and of itself, can help to make some changes. There have to be maybe some changes in some laws in some areas. I can't speak to all areas because we don't live everywhere. But I think people have to just be open and accessible and have a good understanding. Those who are being, who come with a feeling of being not heard, need to learn to get their voice out there and speak. And it's everybody's, I believe it's everybody's responsibility.
Do you believe more in nonviolent protests, or should we become more forceful about it?
I do not believe in violence. Violence begets violence. I believe there are other ways of demonstrating a peaceful way of bringing about change. I'm a believer of Dr. Martin Luther King's theory. We just celebrated his birthday. I am involved in things that he has brought forward, and I am an advocate of that type of action and not violence. And I do not believe in violence in any manner.
So you were alive while Martin Luther King was doing his marches, right?
Yes.
So how did you feel? How did you feel when he got assassinated? When you heard about it the first time?
I felt, because I knew all about Dr. Martin Luther King. I knew what he was trying to do, and I felt that it was for the betterment of all of us, the world, in fact. And to me, it was a very hurting time, in a time of despair. But then I realized you can't take despair and change people, but you can take other things. You take the good things that happened when Dr. Martin Luther King was marching or the other people were marching, and you begin to bring that into your life, and you try to do the best you can to combat racism in a nonviolent way.
Was there ever a time that you have ever tried to enter a march to stop racism?
Oh,
and
I have did some of the marching here in the city on Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday, from Central High School up to the college. I have not gone out of town for any of the marches, but I have did other things in terms of taking training to better understand why it was necessary for us to march and why it was necessary for us to bring a part of ourselves. And well, I said it before, I'm a very quiet person. I don't step out, but I learned through the training I took that if you don't use your voice, you will not be heard, and people will not know what you're thinking. So therefore, after I took the training and went into areas, and I must say that some of these were churches that I went to talk to women, and while it hurt to talk about the experiences, I did that because I thought it was a way of bringing a better response to the injustices that I felt were happening.
How did you decide to take action in the march?
Well, it's just talking with people who I know and who have been involved in them, and in the other training that I have taken, it made me feel that this was something I could do.
Was there any violence that happened during the march?
No.
You said you came from a big family, coming from a big family. Have any of your siblings experienced any acts of racism that affected you and your family?
I think there has been some, and we've had family discussions around that. They realized that their mother and their father did not believe in violence and that there were appropriate ways to take action. I was very active in their schools. I was the president of the elementary school. I was a vice president of the high school, and I would bring my voice there. They knew me there in the schools, and my children knew that I was there, and they know how I deported myself, and I expected them to do the same. I think for some of them, some of my children, it was a little hard for them, I guess, especially my boys, because they realized too what was happening, and they were older.
So you were still in your adult time when there was still segregation.
I think there's still segregation in some places.
In which places do you think the segregation is still?
Sometimes you don't know where it is, but you can go some places and you can feel that perhaps you are not wanted by just the reaction to the people around you.
Do you think that your part in the movement impacted your children?
I think they understood from my perspective and my husband's perspective of how they needed to deport themselves, because violence or acting out was not going to be any better than what was happening to them in terms of racism.
So did you raise your kids believing in anti-racism, or did you just tell them that?
I told them they are as good as anyone else. We believe very good in the value that they bring to the community. And I think you have to value what you have and who you are in order to not feed in to the thing on race, that you're not, because the whole thing about racism, from my perspective, is that somebody tries to put you down without ever knowing who you are, but because of the color of your skin. And to me, that is dishonest, ridiculous, whatever, and that you can rise above that.
Growing up throughout your childhood and your teenage years, have you ever felt scared or unsafe being out around in public?
No, I don't think I can say that, but I knew even in high school that there were some teachers that did not want me there. And it was hurtful. But at that point, I didn't know what to do about it. But I did not act out.
Looking back then, how you didn't act out on what you wanted. What would you do now if you could have done it then?
I would have used my voice to let them know. I think one of the things that I remember very well, that I was in a class for a year, and the teacher never called on me, never acknowledged me, and when I raised my hand, it was like I wasn't there.
Was there ever a time where they showed acts of hatred towards you?
I did not call it hatred. I just felt that they did not like me. I wasn't brought up that way to think about people hating me. So, but I knew there was something wrong. But I'll be very honest, I really thought it was me. I thought there was something wrong with me. It's why I wasn't getting called on.
Has there been any acts or just anything having to do with racism that changed you as a person or changed your life or made you feel?
I think it's made me stronger. And the older I got, the better I began to understand that what racism does to some people. And I think it did it to me for a while. But then when I realized that I was just as good as anybody else and that I had gifts that I could bring to people and knowledge, I used that to keep me strong.
If there was a march to come up, say if racism was as bad as it was in the past, and being up here in the northern states, and if there, like I said, if there was a march, would you join in on the march?
I possibly would. I have marched. I didn't march this year, but I did walk last year and some of the other years. And I realized that we've been marching for quite a few years, and it still has not changed in some ways, the racism that prevails today.
And do you think marching, when you march, what do you feel?
When I marched, I just felt like I was doing it for a purpose, to show that I was participating in something that was dear to me and that meant that I stood with many others. Because, those who march, they don't march just by themselves. Other ethnic groups march with them, and that in that march, it proves that people can come together, people do understand, and there are just a few others who might not get the message that we're all one.
Having you said you're a quiet person and you didn't really speak up and use your voice. Like you said, now if you were to witness an act of racism, would you step in and speak out?
I would have something to say, yes.
Can you tell me what you would say if you were to speak?
I don't know. It would depend on the incident and what was taking place.
If Dr. Martin Luther King was still around and wasn't assassinated, do you believe that there would have been much more changes?
Possibly, yes. I think he had a powerful voice, and he had a message, and his message was of nonviolence. And I think that it was something that people began to understand. And I think those that had the courage early on to do the marching, because I have never lived in the South. I have been to the South, but I have never lived there. I was born and raised in Minnesota. And so therefore, some of the violence and things that have happened to people, I did not know firsthand. But my mother was from Kansas, Fort Scott, and I know that there was discrimination at that particular time when she was growing up and with her other siblings. And her youngest brother overcame it with his camera, and he became a noted photographer, and also was hired by Life magazine. He was a producer, he made movies, he wrote books, he was an artist. He died a few years ago, and he was basically self-taught. And he had a lot that he gave to many, not just black people, but to all people. That was his life work. So there are ways to do things without violence.
So you said he was self-taught. Does that just mean like he didn't go to school, or did he choose not to?
He went to school. Actually, he came up here after my grandmother died. He was a teenager. He was maybe 15, 16. He came here. He made some, when I say he was self-taught, he learned to play the piano on his own. He's written concertos. He was just gifted. He picked up a camera, and he learned to be a photographer. Whatever he seemed to touch, it seemed to bring out his abilities more than the fact that he was limited by what he could do at that particular time and that when he was growing up. There are several schools named after him. There's one here in St. Paul. There's one in Kansas, Wichita, and I think there is I haven't gone the last couple of years to the college down in Fort Scott, but they have built a museum in his honor, and his works are in there. His works have been shown in Washington, D.C., well, all over the world. He's a man of the world. He was a man of the world. He's now deceased. And his name was Gordon Parks. That was our legacy. And we learned from him also about nonviolence and use your innate ability that you have to bring about change.
So, would you say that his natural ability as a musician and photographer helped aid the civil rights movement in the North?
I think in many ways it did.
Okay.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with us?
No, that I just think that having an opportunity to sit with you three makes me feel that there is hope. That what you and the other students are doing, I think, brings about a better awareness of who we are and where we're going and where we can go.
Okay. Well, with everything, we appreciate you sharing your stories with us and everything.
In the interview with the Memory Bank Project.
Well, it's been my pleasure.
Thank you.